Good morning. Blimey, picture quality is terrible today. Very, very early. It's not particularly light. Could have put the electric on, but want to conserve power, save the planet, that sort of thing. Anyway, you can see me well enough, and you can certainly hear me well enough to hear the review. So today is a review of Homeland by R.A. Salvatore, the fantasy author, who's most famous for taking the Forbidden Realms of Dungeons and Dragons and really running with it with his character Dritz Durden, who is a male drow, that's a dark elf, who lives in this city underground. This was the first in a trilogy of origins, really, for Dritz. He did write, I think it was the Icewind Dale trilogy before this in the 80s, but Homeland was the first in a three-part story, which then goes on to Exile and Soren, which is basically telling the story of Dritz's from his birth, his upbringing, his escape, and his eventual becoming of who he would become, which is a legend. So, in a nutshell, in this story that Salvatore has created, you've got this Underdark, which is this sort of kingdom under the ground where all these, for want of a better word, sort of like regions are, each owned by a particular household, and each household is controlled by a matron mother. In Dritz's case, it's matron Malice. They tend to have their daughters as clerics or leaders who know spells and are in charge of stuff. Their sons are soldiers, but males are given very, very few rights. They're a much lesser species. And each house is basically trying to destroy the next house to become house number one. They all want to be ruler and they all worship Loth, the spider god. And Dritz is born into this. He's the third son, which means he's basically going to be sacrificed. But his oldest brother is killed when he's born, so that saves him. And he basically becomes very rebellious. He doesn't want to live the way the Drow live. He realises that what they do is evil, and he doesn't have that same evil within him. He's also a phenomenal fighter. He's taken up by the weapon master, who's also his father. And it's his story of how he goes through this, as well as how all the other characters perceive him. I actually think that this is a great entry point. I think, although I think it's the Icewind Dale trilogy precedes this, that gives you fully fleshed out characters. I think this is the one to start off with if you're going to read Salvatore, just to learn about the Underdark and the characters and how scheming and dark a lot of these characters are. This is fantasy on a small scale in terms of it's all in one location, bar a raid on the surface that happens much, much later in the book. But there's a great sense of place and of character and of character building, and you really get a sense of how, not only how evil these Drow are, but how kind of limited their lives are. They spend all this time just scheming and plotting. We've also got this stuff involving these wizards, which is quite good, and it's well integrated into the plot later. Some of the battle scenes are actually quite good as well. I think Salvatore's writing is very strong. I like his ability to create characters, good and bad, that feel believable. Because when I was going through this, I both read this and listened to the audio version between readings, and I actually forgot that I was listening to or reading a fantasy book. I actually felt like these characters were believable and real, and this was actually going on. And it's quite well written. Certain parts are slow. This isn't a big fantasy romp in terms of they're going and people are travelling and doing a lot of stuff. It's all one location for the most part, and it's a lot of character building and scene setting. But there is some payoff here. There is tension. There is payoff, and I think it's just a really solid, very dark start of a great character's existence. I thoroughly recommend it to anybody who really likes fantasy and wants something a bit different. Doesn't want the usual sort of fantasy tropes and wants something that is, this. Like I say, this is concerned predominantly with elves, and it's a good book. So I'm going to say it's a good book. I liked it very much. I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5 in a rating, which means I think it's a very good book. Yeah, I'm hoping to start reviewing some of the others in the series. I mean, not necessarily every book that he's done, because I think Salvatore's wrote about 36 books in this series, so it's a lot to cover. But it's also how they're deceptive, because the books themselves aren't massive behemoths of books. They're between 300 and 400 pages each, but they have a lot of there's a lot of word count to the page. There's a lot of writing, so they feel much bigger than they look. So you've got the economy of space with something like this, with the fact that they're TARDIS like in terms of dimensions and giving you an awful lot of story. So yeah, that's Homeland by R.A. Salvatore. Thoroughly recommended read. Something a bit different. Breathing. I mean, it came out I think in 1990, was it? But it certainly for me felt refreshing to read this book compared to a lot of other fantasy stories. I like the characters, the settings, the world building, and where it's going. So yeah, good book.